In the summer of 2003, I had this idea stuck in my head for a while. I wanted to hike from the Pacific Ocean all the way to Mount Olympus, cutting right through the heart of the Hoh rainforest in Washington state. I'd done a few decent backcountry hikes by then, some overnighters, some longer, but nothing like this. The Olympic Peninsula had always drawn me. I liked the feeling of being swallowed up in something bigger than me. Something older, wetter, denser. The Hoh rainforest is like that. You can walk 20 feet in and feel like you've been dropped into another world. So I planned it out for early July. I knew the area was known for wet weather, but the forecast said it would be relatively dry that week. I packed like I usually did: standard ultralight gear, GPS, compass, topo maps, water filter, food, bear canister, tarp, first aid, headlamp, multi-tool, and a couple of emergency flares just in case. I wasn't worried. I liked hiking alone. I liked the quiet. I got started at the coast, near the mouth of the Hoh River. The first day was everything I'd hoped for. You get that mix of salt and cedar in the air, the rich smell of moss and earth. I followed the trail upstream, passing fallen logs as big as boxcars, some cut through to make room for hikers, others you had to climb over or duck under. I made good time. The trees were impossibly tall, and the sunlight filtered through like gold mist in the late afternoon. Ferns reached my waist, and little birds fluttered around but didn't seem scared of me. It was quiet but alive. That night, I made it to one of the designated backcountry sites along the river. Nobody else was there. I set up camp, cooked some instant rice and jerky, and listened to the water rushing nearby. Slept like a rock. No problems. I woke up to a world of white fog. Not just mist, not morning haze, but full-blown. Can't see more than 10 feet in any direction. Soup-thick fog. I'd seen fog before, but this was another level. It hung low and never lifted. I gave it some time, hoping the sun would burn it off, but by 10 a.m., it was still as thick as ever. GPS was spotty, signal kept jumping. I couldn't get a solid fix, but I knew that if I just followed the river upstream, I'd hit the next campsite eventually. The trail got harder to follow. Everything looked the same in the fog. The trees all looked identical, moss-covered giants, and the trail was just a worn-down patch of forest floor, half hidden under fallen leaves and pine needles. Sometimes, I'd lose the trail entirely and have to backtrack to find it again. The world was so silent in that fog. My own footsteps sounded like they echoed. Every now and then, I'd hear something, like a branch crack far off or a distant bird call, but I couldn't tell what direction it came from. The fog played tricks on your ears. By late afternoon, I was wiped. My legs ached. My neck was stiff from looking down and trying not to trip over roots, and I hadn't seen a single hiker all day. I found a small clearing next to the river, about 20 yards across, surrounded by thick trees. It seemed flat and dry enough to pitch the tent. I figured I was maybe a mile or two short of where I wanted to be, but with this fog, I wasn't risking pushing on in near darkness. I set up camp, laid out my sleeping bag, and ate a protein bar for dinner. I didn't want to waste time cooking. The air was damp and still. My shirt stuck to my back. Everything smelled like rotting leaves and cedar bark. When night fell, it dropped hard. Pitch black. The fog didn't go away, it just got darker. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face without the flashlight. I stayed in the tent, laying on my back, listening to the river nearby. It should have been relaxing, but it wasn't. There was a weight to the dark I hadn't felt before. Something made my skin prickle. I wasn't exactly scared, but I couldn't relax. Felt like something was watching, like the forest had gotten thicker around me, closed in tighter. I tried to ignore it. Sometime after midnight, I'd guess around 2 a.m., I woke up. I didn't know why at first. I hadn't had a nightmare or anything. I just suddenly found myself wide awake, heart racing a little, ears wide open. That's when I heard it. A noise, a kind of breathing, not normal breathing. This was deep and slow, heavy. It sounded like someone dragging each breath out, like Darth Vader but without the mechanical edge. Just raw, damp huffing, almost like an animal, but not quite. It had weight to it, wet, throaty, guttural. It was close. I didn't move, just laid there frozen, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. My first thought was bear, but this didn't sound like a bear. No sniffing, no footfalls, just breathing. Long, slow inhales and sharp exhales. The tent walls seemed to shrink in. I felt like I was in a coffin. I reached slowly to my side for the flashlight. I didn't dare unzip the bag all the way. I slid the flashlight into my hand and clicked it on softly. I pulled the drawstring of the tent door just a couple of inches open. The sound was 5 feet to my right. 5 feet. It was just outside the tent. I pointed the flashlight toward the noise and flicked it on fully. The light hit a wall of brown fur. I gasped, then held my breath. It was a Roosevelt elk. Massive, maybe the biggest I'd ever seen. His shoulders looked like boulders. The light hit his side, and he jerked his head up. I saw his eyes reflect the light, 2 pale green orbs, wide and confused. He made this sudden snorting noise, flinched, and turned to bolt. In his panic, he turned the wrong way and slammed headfirst into a thick alder tree just beyond my tent. The sound was insane. It was like someone swinging a baseball bat into a steel pole. The impact echoed through the trees. I winced, turned the flashlight, and saw the elk stumble, fall to its side, and go completely still. I just sat there. Everything was still, silent, then groaning, shifting. He wasn't dead. After a few seconds, he scrambled to his feet with a wheeze, stumbled away from the clearing, crashing through the brush with a kind of awkward strength. Branches snapped, footfalls faded, then silence again. I turned off the flashlight, zipped the tent shut, and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. My heart pounded for hours. At dawn, the fog was still thick. I stepped outside, stretching my stiff back and legs. I found hoof marks in the dirt and a smear on the tree bark where the elk hit it. There was a clump of fur caught in the bark. I don't know how he didn't break his neck. I packed up quickly. I didn't want to spend another night in that clearing. The fog stayed with me most of the day, but by late afternoon it finally began to thin. I picked up the trail again and made it to the Glacier Meadows campsite, just as I'd planned 2 days before. There were a few other hikers there. Seeing other people felt strange after being so alone in the fog. I didn't tell them anything, just ate quietly, nodded when someone said hello, and slept like a dead man. I made it to Mount Olympus 2 days later. The sky cleared. I got some amazing views from the Blue Glacier overlook, but the hike didn't feel the same after that night. I never forgot that sound, that breathing, that split second before the light hit him. It wasn't just the scare. It was the fact that something so massive, so powerful, could get just as lost in the dark as I could. We were both blind, both stuck in the same fog. He didn't mean me harm. He was just as confused, just as scared, maybe. But that night changed how I felt about the wilderness. It's not about fear. It's about respect. That forest doesn't care about your plans or your confidence. It's older than you, deeper than you, and it doesn't owe you anything. You walk into it, you take your chances. You walk out and you don't forget it. And I haven't. Not once. Not in over 20 years. It had been years since I started hiking alone in the Santa Monica Mountains, and by now I knew every switchback, every ridgeline, every soft patch of trail on the 5-mile loop I liked most. It wasn't for exercise or some deep need to connect with nature. It was more about shutting off the rest of the world. That loop became a routine I clung to, especially when the days got loud and the city felt like it was pressing down on me from all sides. I always timed it for dusk, intentionally. That part of the day when people were heading home and the light was just starting to soften. The trails cleared out fast after 5 p.m., especially on weekdays, and by 6 or 6:30, the chances of running into anyone dropped to almost zero. I liked that. I liked knowing I had the hills mostly to myself. That day, I started a little late. It had been hot earlier, one of those LA spring days that pushes the mid-80s. But by the time I parked at the trailhead, the air had cooled. The light was shifting fast, and long shadows stretched across the gravel lot. I zipped up my lightweight hoodie, tossed a flashlight and a water bottle into my side pocket, and started walking. I didn't need a map. I'd done this hike over 100 times, probably more. The trail started with a steep incline, zigzagging up the hill in short, dusty stretches. The dirt here was always dry, even after rain, and it kicked up in tiny clouds with each step. I kept my pace steady, not rushing. I liked the quiet more than the workout. The city faded behind me quickly. Once you got a few bends in, the trail blocked out the roads, the houses, even the distant drone of cars. Just wind through dry brush, some distant birds, and the soft crunch of your own footsteps. I passed an old oak tree that I always used as a checkpoint. About a mile in, the bark was split from lightning decades ago, but it still stood tall. A few crows scattered when I got close. Further up, I spotted a coyote loping along a side trail, not far off. He paused, looked at me, and then vanished into the brush. They never really bothered me. We had an understanding, mutual disinterest. Around mile 2, the trail dipped into a shaded canyon. This part always felt cooler and a bit damper. A narrow path hugged the hillside, and a few tiny springs sometimes left damp spots in the dirt, though they were mostly dry this time of year. The smell of sage and dusty rock filled the air. That's when I first saw him. At first, I thought it was just another hiker. Nothing unusual. I could see a figure moving up the trail ahead of me, coming from the opposite direction. He was still far off, maybe 200 feet, but something made me slow down just slightly. He was alone. No backpack, no water, just walking steadily toward me. As we got closer, I took in more detail. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe late 50s or early 60s. He wore a faded blue hoodie and light tan pants. His stride was casual, almost too casual for someone who should be wrapping up a hike at this hour. His hands were in his pockets. That stood out. Nobody hikes with both hands in their pockets unless they're not planning to use them. But what got me, what made something deep in my chest tighten, was his face. I recognized him. Not like, oh, that's the guy from the gas station. Or he looks like my cousin. No, I knew that face. I'd seen it dozens of times, frozen on a screen. It was unmistakable. It was the actor who played Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs. First, I thought maybe I was wrong. Could be someone who just looked like him. That's a hell of a thing to assume about someone. Hey, you look like a movie serial killer. But as we got within maybe 10 feet of each other, I saw it clearly. The jawline, the eyes, the mouth. Older, sure. Softer around the edges. But it was him. And then he looked at me, and he knew that I knew. Our eyes locked, and I saw something shift in his face. Not surprise, not amusement, just this sort of heavy, tired understanding. A small tightening at the corners of his mouth, like he was used to this, like he'd seen the recognition flare up in strangers before and didn't expect anything else. He didn't break eye contact, but he didn't smile either. He just looked right through me, like he'd already accepted whatever I might think of him. In that split second, he didn't say anything, obviously, but his expression said everything. Yes, I'm him. No, I'm not a real killer. I know what I look like to you. It wasn't fear I felt. It was discomfort, an involuntary instinct pulling me to move. I nodded slightly, reflex, and kept walking. Brisk pace, straight past him. My body went stiff. My heart rate spiked even though I wasn't moving that fast. I walked with purpose, eyes on the trail, arms swinging slightly. I didn't turn around, not for 100 yards. And when I finally did glance back, just a quick over-the-shoulder look, he was gone. No figure on the trail behind me, no footsteps, no movement. I scanned the edges of the path, the dry brush, the low trees. Nothing. I kept walking, but now something had changed. It wasn't the light. It wasn't the trail. It was me. I was hyper-aware now. Every crackle in the underbrush, every flicker of movement in the corner of my eye felt heavier, felt loaded. My flashlight was still in my pocket, but I didn't want to pull it out yet. I still had a little light left. The shadows were long, but I could make out the trail just fine. I moved faster now, not running, just more alert. My boots landed harder. My breathing got shallow. I wasn't scared, not exactly, but something about that man stuck in my mind and wouldn't let go. And then I saw the boot print. It was just past the next bend. in a patch of fine dust near a low incline. Deep, clear, larger than mine, and it was on top of the dust that my own prints had disturbed on the way up. That made no sense. He had been coming from the opposite direction. We crossed paths. He should have passed me once. That was it. So how the hell was he ahead of me now? I froze, looked around. No side trails, no shortcuts. That's when I noticed the smell. Very faint, sharp, almost like gasoline. Maybe paint thinner, something artificial. It was barely there, just riding the breeze. My hands were trembling now. I pulled out the flashlight and turned it on, low beam, just enough to see a few feet in front of me. Every time I pointed it into the brush, I expected to see something, someone, staring back, but there was nothing. I kept going. 3 miles down, 2 left. The trail climbed again. A short, steep section with loose rocks. I moved quickly, careful with my footing, scanning the sides. Every 5 or 6 steps, I glanced back. Still nothing. And then I saw it, just off the trail, resting against a rock. Piece of paper. I stepped closer, sweeping the flashlight over it. It was a printed photo, black and white, a young version of the man I'd just seen. Studio headshot, smiling, clean-shaven, eyes looking just past the camera. No name, no signature, just the face. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to. I didn't even want to know if it was paper or glossy photo stock. I just looked at it for a second, long enough to confirm I wasn't imagining it, then stepped around it. It was intentional. That was clear. I walked the last stretch with the flashlight shaking in my hand. The trail wound back toward the parking area. I could smell the city again, faint but familiar. A breeze kicked up, cold now. I passed the last trail marker, a metal post with faded numbers and stickers. My car came into view like a life raft. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there, not crying, not panicking, just stunned. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about his face, the weight behind it, the tired eyes. Not angry, not mocking, just used to it. Used to being seen not as a person, but as that guy. And maybe that's all it was. A man taking a walk in the hills, just like me. Maybe he left that photo because he knew what I thought. Maybe it wasn't a threat. Maybe it wasn't even weird to him. Maybe it was routine. But I never hiked that loop at dusk again. I started going earlier, daylight hours only, and I never saw him again. But that boot print stayed on the trail for weeks. I checked every time, and every time I walked around it, just in case. I don't usually do winter hikes, not because I'm afraid of the cold or snow, though I don't love either, but because I like seeing where I'm going. I like dry trails, clear skies, easy exits. That's just how I think. I've always been careful, maybe too careful. The type who checks trail maps the night before, lays out gear in neat rows, brings backups for backups. I'm not a survivalist or anything. I just don't like surprises out in the wild. But that year, something changed. Work had been relentless. My apartment in the city had become a place I barely recognized. Just a spot I passed out in between meetings and phone calls. I felt like I was being slowly pressed between 2 glass plates. So, when an old college friend named Mark texted about a weekend snow hike in the North Woods, middle of nowhere, total silence, untouched forest, I said yes before I even thought about it. That was out of character for me, but that's how badly I needed out. We drove up on a Friday, into the deep parts of northern Vermont, hours past anything most people would call civilization. No towns, no lights, no phone signal, just dense pine forest blanketed in thick snow. The roads were narrow and half-plowed, and our SUV fishtailed a few times before we reached the logging trail that served as the closest thing to a parking area. There were 4 of us, me, Mark, his younger brother Pete, and a guy named Dan that none of us knew very well. Mark said Dan worked with him and was good at wilderness stuff, whatever that meant. I didn't ask questions. I was just glad to be out of the city. We packed light but smart layers, snowshoes, water filters, high-calorie food. Each of us had a thermal sleeping bag and compact tent. Mark brought a GPS tracker, and I had printed maps with pencil-marked trails, even though most were faded or outdated. We weren't planning on bushwhacking too far, just a 10-mile loop through deep woods, circling back on day 3. We started just after sunrise. The cold bit through our gloves almost instantly. It was the kind of cold that makes your eyes water and your lips split if you talk too much. The snow was knee-deep in some places, and we had to move slow. Every hour felt like 2. The sun stayed low in the sky, never rising far enough to warm us. The woods were empty, not just quiet but hollow.
No Birdsson.
No movement. Even the wind seemed to die once we got more than a mile in. Just trees and white, and the soft creak of our snowshoes pressing down the powder. That first night, we camped near a dry stream bed, built a small fire, ate protein bars and freeze-dried meals, and zipped into our tents by 7 p.m. Nobody wanted to sit out long. I barely slept. Every sound outside the tent jolted me. The pop of tree bark in the cold. The faint thud of snow dropping from a branch. Somewhere in the distance, maybe a fox yelping, though it could have just been ice shifting. The world felt thinner out there, more fragile. By morning, the fire pit was buried in a fresh half-inch of snow. The temp had dropped well below 0 overnight, and Dan's water filter cracked when he tried to thaw it with his breath. We shared supplies and moved on. The trail disappeared by mile 6, just blank white and tree trunks. We navigated by compass and guesswork. Then, late that second afternoon, we found the words. We were cutting through a shallow valley, maybe 50 yards across, flanked by tall pines that had dropped snow in uneven mounds. Pete was walking ahead of me and stopped so suddenly I nearly ran into him. Mark was off to the left, and Dan trailed behind. I looked down where Pete was pointing. There, in the snow in front of us, someone had drawn letters. Big ones, maybe 2 feet tall. They stretched in a slight curve, as if traced by a stick or gloved hand. Per audacia ad ignotum, Latin, clear, sharp, no smudges, no distortion from wind or melting. But here's the thing that froze my gut. There were no footprints around the words. None. No entry tracks, no exits, just untouched snow in every direction, except for ours. Pete looked back at me. I looked at Mark. No one said anything. Just 4 people staring at clean, deliberate writing in the middle of nowhere. I stepped carefully around the edge, inspecting the snow. Not even an animal trail. No drag marks. No indentations. Whoever or whatever had made those letters hadn't walked here. At least not in any way that left a mark. Mark pulled out his phone to take a photo, but of course we had no signal. The camera worked, though. He took a few shots. Pete knelt down to inspect the letters more closely. He scraped the edge with his glove. The snow was maybe 4 inches deep, compact underneath, like someone had cleared the top layer very precisely. Dan finally spoke. I think it's Latin. Something about going toward the unknown. That's what we ended up guessing too. We Googled it when we got back days later and found it roughly meant, through audacity toward the unknown. None of us said it out loud then, but the vibe shifted. We moved on after a while, but not with the same ease. The silence felt heavier now, like the woods were watching us. That night, we camped in a thick grove of firs. We didn't bother with a fire, too cold to sit around. We all just ate quickly and got into our tents. No jokes, no stories, just a shared tension that nobody wanted to name. Around 2 a.m., I woke up needing to piss. I unzipped my bag, layered up, and stepped out into the snow. It was dead still. Clouds had rolled in, and the moonlight was dull behind them. My breath fogged thick in front of me. I walked a few yards from camp, found a spot, and did what I had to do. When I turned back toward camp, I saw a shape move just beyond the tree line. It was tall, human-shaped, barely visible. I froze. It didn't move again. I stared for a full minute. Nothing. Then I turned and walked back, slow, not looking over my shoulder again until I was zipped back inside my tent. By morning, I was convinced I'd imagined it. Except, Pete said he heard movement too, and Dan looked like he hadn't slept at all. Mark brushed it off. Probably just snow falling from trees. We packed and hiked the rest of the loop with a new pace. Faster, less careful, more eager to get out. We barely spoke. The weirdest part? We never found tracks from anyone else. Not one. The area we were in wasn't closed, but it also wasn't well traveled. No ranger stations, no trail cams, no cabins. Just raw, open forest. And in 3 days, we hadn't seen a single soul. When we got back to the car, it was like stepping into another life. The heater roared. My phone found a signal and started buzzing. We just sat there for a while, thawing out, not talking about it. A week later, I met up with Mark to grab some gear he'd borrowed. We sat in his kitchen, drinking beers, and I finally asked about the writing. He admitted something that made my skin crawl. He'd gone back to look at the photos he took. And in one of the frames, just one, you could see something behind the trees. On the far edge, a figure, barely visible, almost like it was watching. He didn't show me the photo, said he deleted it, said it didn't feel right to keep. I never asked again. I haven't been on a snow hike since. I stick to spring trails now, daylight hours only, well-traveled paths, no more middle of nowhere. And I never forgot those words, per audacia ad ignotum, through audacity toward the unknown. I don't know who wrote them, or how, or why they left no trace. But I do know one thing, whatever was out there didn't want to be found. And whatever it was, it saw us. And I'm not going back to look for it, ever. A few years back, I went on a hiking trip in the Adirondacks with my ex. We had been going up there for vacation for the last 4 trips, always hiking, camping, or doing something in the woods. It was early spring this time, a season I usually loved because the trails were quiet, the air was cool, and everything smelled damp and earthy as it came back to life after winter. But it was also a time when a lot of the trails hadn't been cleaned up yet. Fallen branches, mud, and tangled brush were everywhere. We picked a trail that looped around a lake. It was a single trailhead, meaning one entrance and exit, so once you were on the loop, you had to commit to doing the whole thing unless you were willing to bushwhack through the forest or marsh. That day, we were aiming to hike halfway around to check out a waterfall we'd heard about. I wasn't feeling great from the start. The day before, I'd been laid up in the cabin we were renting, sick as a dog after eating some bad food from a roadside diner. I'd spent half the night vomiting, sweating, and curled up with a blanket. I probably should have just stayed back and rested, but I didn't want to waste the day. My ex was always eager to push forward on these trips, and I didn't want to drag the mood down. So there I was, tired, dehydrated, stomach still tender, trudging along behind him on a muddy trail that wound through thick pines and bare-limbed hardwood trees. The trail was uneven with half-rotted logs, rocks slick with damp moss, and muddy ruts that sucked at our boots. The ground was soft from snowmelt, and there were big patches of waterlogged earth where I had to hop from one high spot to the next to keep from soaking my feet. About halfway around, near the part of the trail that curved close to the waterfall, I started feeling uneasy. At first, I thought it was just my own nerves acting up because I was already tired and jumpy. But then I heard it, a rumbling sound, low and heavy, like something large stomping the ground. It was faint at first, but it was getting closer. I stopped in my tracks and held my breath, listening hard. The noise wasn't steady. It came in bursts like something pounding the ground in short, heavy beats. I looked around, heart pounding, scanning the thick trees and underbrush. The woods were dense here, the path narrow. It would be easy for something or someone to move close without me seeing them. My stomach turned, not from the leftover sickness, but from a sharp spike of fear. Then the growl started. I don't know how to explain it clearly because it wasn't like anything I'd heard before. It wasn't the snarl of a bear or the cough of a deer. It sounded mechanical, like a strange, vibrating growl, almost electronic, building fast like a revving motor. It reminded me of the sound effects you hear in alien movies. Something strange, unnatural, rising in pitch and speed. My body reacted before my brain did. I just bolted, I ran, stumbling over roots and rocks, splashing through mud, heart hammering so hard it felt like my chest would burst. My lungs burned. My legs screamed in protest. I could hear my ex calling out behind me, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. My fear was a living thing, driving me forward, screaming at me to get away. The trail was a nightmare. I tripped twice, smashing my knees on the ground, scraping my palms on sharp stones as I caught myself. I could hear my breath rasping in and out, loud and ragged. My clothes were soaked with sweat, and every muscle in my body was trembling. I ran until I couldn't anymore, until I collapsed in a heap, gasping, heart racing so fast it felt like it would rip out of my chest. When my ex finally caught up, I refused to go back the way we had come. There was no way I was setting foot back on that trail, no matter what. We stood there for a few minutes, trying to figure out what to do. The problem was that the trail only looped one way. We couldn't just cut across, not without going off-trail through thick forest and, worse, through bog. But I didn't care. I wasn't stepping back into that section of woods. My fear was bigger than my exhaustion, bigger than my sense of logic. I just wanted out. So we picked a direction and went off-trail, cutting through dense trees, thick underbrush, and then, eventually, into a bog. The bog was a nightmare all its own. The ground was wet and soft, sucking at our boots. Every step felt like we were fighting the earth itself. My boots got stuck more than once, nearly pulling off my feet. My legs were shaking, and I could feel blisters forming on my heels. My pants were soaked from the knees down, caked with mud and cold, dirty water. The sun was starting to dip, and the light in the woods was changing, turning cold and blue. My body was done, completely spent, but I forced myself to keep moving. We had to reach the far side of the loop, where the trail came back out near the parking lot. Took hours, or at least it felt like it. Every step through the bog was slow and miserable. My ex was ahead, pushing through reeds and tangled branches, slipping and cursing under his breath. I just followed, head down, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. My mind was locked on the simple goal: get out. Finally, we broke through the last line of trees and saw the trail again, muddy and narrow but clear, winding up toward the parking lot. I almost cried with relief. When we reached the car, I did cry. I leaned against the car door, shaking, muddy, and exhausted. My whole body felt like it was vibrating from the adrenaline and the crash after. My ex tried to calm me down, but I was beyond reason at that point. I just wanted to leave, to get away from that place, to never see those woods again. That night, back at the cabin, I curled up in bed, shivering, mind racing. I couldn't get the sound out of my head. That low, rising, alien-like growl. It had been burned into my memory, looping over and over. I barely slept. The next morning, we packed up and left. I remember staring out the window as we drove, watching the trees whip past, the mountains fading in the distance, feeling like I had escaped something I couldn't quite name. I swore I wouldn't go back. I told myself that the next vacation would be in a city, somewhere with streets and lights and noise, somewhere I could walk without wondering what was lurking just out of sight. Years passed. I stayed true to my word. I didn't go back to the Adirondacks. I didn't even go hiking for a long time. The memory of that trip stuck with me, heavy and unsettling, even after my ex and I split up and went our separate ways. Then one night, while I was home alone, I was playing nature sounds on the internet. I liked listening to them while I worked or read. Rain, wind in the trees, birdsong. It usually helped me relax. That night, I clicked on a track labeled Forest Sounds, Northeast Woods, and let it play. A few minutes in, I froze. There it was, that sound, that growl. It started low, then built, fast and strange, rising in pitch like something mechanical or alien. I felt a chill go up my spine, a real physical shiver that ran from the back of my neck all the way down my arms. My heart started to pound. My palms went cold and sweaty. I paused the track and replayed that section, heart racing. I dug into the details, pulling up the description, trying to figure out what I was hearing. It turned out to be the mating call of a ruffed grouse. A bird. Not a bear. Not a mountain lion. Not some strange predator stalking us through the woods. A grouse, a fat, ground-dwelling bird that beats its wings against its chest to make that bizarre, drumming sound. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling a mix of relief, embarrassment, and something else. Something like awe. All that fear, all that panic, all that misery, because of a horny bird trying to find a mate. I laughed, then. A shaky, nervous laugh that bubbled up and wouldn't stop. I laughed until I had tears in my eyes. I thought about that day in the bog, the panic, the exhaustion, the way I'd sworn never to go back. And all along, it had been just a bird. But here's the thing. Knowing that didn't erase the experience. It didn't make the fear I felt any less real. In that moment, deep in the woods, tired, sick, and scared, I truly believed I was in danger. My body had reacted the only way it knew how: run, escape, survive. And maybe that's the lesson I carried forward. That fear doesn't always have to make sense. That sometimes our minds fill in the gaps with the worst possible thing, even when the truth is far more harmless. I never went back to the Adirondacks, but I did eventually start hiking again, carefully, cautiously, always a little more aware of the sounds around me. And every time I heard a rustle in the trees or a strange noise in the distance, I reminded myself, sometimes it's just a bird. A few years ago, I was hiking alone with my dog, Max. He was a mixed breed, part shepherd, part who knows what, but smart, alert, and fast. I loved taking him on hikes. He always seemed to have a better sense of the trail than I did, always sniffing out the right turns, always keeping his ears pricked and his head up, watching and listening. We were in the foothills of the Rockies, in a place I had hiked dozens of times before. I knew the trails, the terrain, the sounds of the birds and wind, the shifting shadows. It wasn't a challenging trail, nothing too steep or technical. Just a good half-day loop that wound through pine forests and open stretches of meadow. It was late autumn, and the air was crisp. The leaves had mostly fallen, leaving a crunchy carpet of brown on the forest floor. The sky was pale blue, the sun sitting low, casting long golden light through the trees. It was the kind of day I usually loved. The kind of day that made me feel peaceful, clear-headed, far away from the mess and noise of regular life. Max trotted ahead of me, his nose low to the ground, tail wagging gently. I kept a steady pace, listening to the sound of his paws rustling through the dry leaves. I didn't see another soul on the trail all morning. It was just me, Max, the trees, and the wind. About halfway through the loop, we entered a thicker section of forest. The trees grew close here, the light dimming under the heavy canopy of pines. The trail narrowed, and the ground became rockier, with roots and boulders poking up underfoot. I slowed down, watching my steps, and Max dropped back beside me, his body low, his ears flicking. That was the first time I noticed something felt off. Max was usually eager to stay ahead, but now he kept glancing over his shoulder. His tail, usually held high and wagging, was stiff and low. His ears twitched, turning toward sounds I couldn't hear. I felt a flicker of unease in my chest, but I pushed it down. Maybe it was just a deer nearby or the scent of another animal. Max was smart, sure, but he was still a dog, and dogs sometimes spooked over nothing. Still, I found myself scanning the trees more often, looking into the shadows, my stomach tightening. The air felt heavier here, the silence deeper. I realized I wasn't hearing the usual sounds. No bird calls, no rustling squirrels or chipmunks darting through the underbrush, just stillness. We kept going. About 20 minutes later, we reached a narrow ridge where the trail cut along the edge of a rocky slope. I paused to catch my breath, taking a sip of water and wiping the sweat from my forehead. Max stood beside me, tense, his body trembling just slightly. I reached down to pat his head, feeling the tightness in his neck. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a flicker of movement, a ripple in the shadows near the trees about 50 yards back. I squinted, holding my breath. Then I saw the shape, low to the ground, sleek, muscular, moving with slow, careful steps. A mountain lion. I froze. My mind went blank for a moment, and then panic surged through me, quick and sharp. I knew enough to recognize the threat, but knowing what to do in theory is a lot different than facing it in real life. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Max stiffened, a low, trembling growl rising in his throat. I backed up slowly, eyes locked on the cat. It was watching us, still, patient, tail twitching just slightly. I could feel the weight of its gaze, the tension in its body, the way it sized us up. I remembered a saying I'd once heard, probably in some half-joking way, but now it burned into my mind, cold and sharp. The dog doesn't have to outrun the mountain lion. It just has to outrun you. I felt a sick wave roll through my gut. Max was fast, faster than me by a long shot. If that cat charged, he could sprint ahead, leave me behind without a second thought. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. I had to think. Panic wouldn't help. Running wouldn't help. I knew that. Mountain lions were ambush predators. They struck fast, and they were stronger, faster, more agile than any human. I couldn't outrun it. I took a deep breath, eyes never leaving the cat. I raised my arms slowly, making myself look as big as I could. I knew you were supposed to stand your ground, not turn away, not crouch or run. My legs felt like jelly, and my breath came in shallow gasps, but I stood tall, shoulders wide. Max stayed close, his growl rising, his body tense like a coiled spring. For a long minute, we all just stood there, me, Max, the cat. The air felt stretched thin, like the whole world was holding its breath. Then the cat took a slow, deliberate step forward. I felt my heart seize, my legs twitching with the instinct to bolt. Max let out a sharp, warning bark, loud and high, teeth bared. The cat stopped. Another long moment passed. Then, slowly, like melting shadows, it turned. With a flick of its tail, it slinked back into the trees, disappearing into the dense cover. I didn't move, couldn't. My legs felt locked in place, my chest tight. Max stayed alert, ears pricked, body shaking with tension. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to move, legs wobbling, sweat cold on my back. I crouched, wrapping a shaking arm around Max's neck, pressing my face into his fur. His body was still taut, ready to run, but he stayed beside me. I don't know how long we stayed like that. When I finally got to my feet, my knees almost gave out. We didn't go back the way we came. I took a shortcut I knew from an old game trail, cutting through rough, uneven ground to get back to the lower section of the loop. It was longer, but I couldn't bring myself to walk that ridge again, to cross the place where the cat had watched us. The sun was dipping lower, the light turning dim and gray. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of the wind made my skin crawl. Max stayed close, eyes sharp, body tense, every step. By the time we reached the parking lot, I was shaking so hard I could barely unlock the car. My hands fumbled with the keys, my breath coming in ragged, shallow bursts. Max jumped into the back seat and curled up tight, eyes wide, head up, watching every movement outside the window. I sat in the car for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring out at the darkening forest. My mind kept circling back to the same awful thought. If that cat had decided to charge, Max would have been gone, and I would have been left. The dog doesn't have to outrun the mountain lion. It just has to outrun you. That night, back home, I couldn't stop shaking. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that sleek, muscular body in the trees, those cold, sharp eyes. I thought about how thin the line had been, how close I'd come to being nothing more than prey. Max slept curled at the foot of the bed, his body pressed tight against the wall, ears flicking in his sleep. I watched him, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and unease. He was my companion, my hiking partner, my loyal friend. But when it came down to it, when it was life or death, he would have saved himself. And I couldn't blame him. That's nature. That's survival. The next day, I cleaned the mud off my boots, put away my hiking gear, and sat in the quiet of my kitchen, staring at nothing. The woods, the trail, the clean mountain air, they had all felt like home before. Now they felt like something else, something raw and real and sharp. I didn't stop hiking after that, but I changed. I became more cautious, more alert, more aware of the fine line we walk when we step into wild spaces. I watched Max with new eyes, too, saw the sharpness in him, the animal instincts under the soft fur and wagging tail. And sometimes, when I was deep in the woods, alone but for his steady presence at my side, I remembered that old saying, the one that had haunted me in that cold moment of fear. The dog doesn't have to outrun the mountain lion. It just has to outrun you.